Chapter 16, Brothers. Omri had fully intended to go back to sleep. Patrick did almost immediately, but Omri, he just couldn't, tired as he was. Instead, he lay in the candlelight, his head turned towards the table where Boone lay, and Little Bear sat cross-legged next to him, erect, watchful. Sometimes Omri would close one eye, but he did so no more than doze. Each time he opened them, he would meet Little Bear's unblinking stare. It was partly the rat that kept Omri awake. It pattered around under the floor for hours, making Omri nervous, but it never came anywhere near the men. No, that wasn't the main thing. The main things were Omri's thoughts. What was he going to do? Would he bring Little Bear's woman to life, he had promised? But then what? It was hard enough with not only one little being to protect and feed and keep secret, much harder after Boone, and now there'd be three, and one a woman. Young as Omri was, Omri knew that a woman and two men spelled trouble. And what if they should be children? For Little Bear, the unpredictable moods, his demands, his occasional cruelties, Omri liked him. He wanted to keep him, but he also knew now that that was impossible. Whichever way he thought about it, in the end, was the same, disaster of some kind. Whatever magic he had brought to this strange adventure about must be put to use to send the little people back to their own place and time. Having decided this, however, sadly and reluctantly, Omri's stressful thoughts let go their hold on him. He drifted off to sleep. When he opened his eyes, dawn was breaking. The morning chorus of birds was just beginning. The candle had burned itself out. The rat had gone to sleep. So had Little Bear, nodding over his bow. Omri peered closely to Boone. The yellow field dressing on his wound moved steadily up and down, and his skin lost its gray look. He was much better. Of course, Little Bear shouldn't have gone to sleep, but just the same, he had done his job, and he had done his best. Omri slipped out of bed. His blazer was hanging from the hook on the back of his door, and he took a paper bag with the woman in it out of his pocket. Moving to tiptoe, he went to the cupboard, took out the plastic soldier, put the plastic Indian girl, and locked the cupboard door. When he heard little movements, he unlocked the cupboard and opened the door a crack so she wouldn't be frightened in the dark. Then he got back into bed, covered himself up, all except his eyes, and he stayed perfectly still to watch what would happen. At first, nothing did. Then slowly, stealthily, the door was pushed a little further open. Out crept this beautiful Indian girl. There was enough light in the room now for Omri to see the black of her hair, and the chestnut brown of her skin, and the bright red of her dress. He couldn't see her expression, but he guessed she was bewildered. She glanced all around, and at once spotted Boone lying on the ground, and Little Bear dozing beside him. She approached them cautiously. For a few moments she lingered behind Little Bear, clearly not sure whether she should touch him or wake him or not. She decided against it, and circling Boone at the feet, sat herself cross-legged on the other side, facing Little Bear. She sat staring at him. The three of them were so utterly still that it may have been that they were still plastic. Then a blackbird made an unusual noise outside, and Little Bear sat up sharply. At once he saw her. His whole body gave a jolt. Omri felt a prickling up the back of his neck the way they looked at each other. It went on for a very long time. Then slowly, they rose to their feet. Little Bear spoke to her quietly in some strange language, and she answered, and he smiled. Standing there on either side of Boone, not touching, they talked for some minutes in a low voice. Then he put out his hand, and she put hers into his. They stood silently there, holding hands. Their hands dropped. Little Bear pointed to Boone and began talking again. The girl crouched down, touched Boone gently and expertly. She looked at Little Bear and nodded. Then Little Bear looked around the room, and he saw Omri. Omri put his finger up to his lips, and shook his head, as if to say, "Don't tell her about me." Little Bear nodded. He took the girl by the hand, led her to the seed box, up to the ramp, and into the longhouse. After a moment or two, he came out again. He ran the length of the table and stood on its edge, as near to Omri as he could get. Do you like her? Omri asked. Little Bear put his hands on his belt and unfastened it. I like. Fit wife for chief. I pay much for her. And he handed Omri the belt that he made out of the shiny white shells. Now Omri hear Little Bear. Women say Boone good, not die. Little Bear pleased. Omri take Boone, but put in Longhouse. Women take care. Give little medicines. He held up the pill boxes. Omri get food. Make wedding feast. How can you have a wedding feast with only 2 Indians? Yes, not good. Omri make more Indians. Come to feast, he said hopefully. Then Omri shook his head. Little Bear's face fell. Little Bear, wouldn't you rather have your wedding at home with your own tribe? Little Bear was not a fool, and he understood at once what this meant. And he stood still, staring at Omri. Omri put in box, send back, he said. His voice was very flat. Omri couldn't tell if he liked the idea or not. Well, what do you think? Wouldn't it be better? Very slowly, the Indian nodded his head. And Boone? Boone, too. Make him my brother first. Yes, and then I'll send you all back. When? When Boone's well enough. Once Omri had decided, every day that passed was important because it was one day nearer to the last day. Patrick was sad as he was, but he didn't argue against Omri's decision. It's really the only way, Patrick said. After that, he didn't talk about it much. He just tried to be at Omri's house as much as possible. He couldn't do things with Boone much, of course, even though at a day or two Boone was sitting up in the longhouse and demanding to talk to his horse, which was brought to the entrance for the purpose, and the whining and all sorts of special food and drink. I can't be expected to get my strength back if you won't give me some of that hard stuff, he nagged. He even pretended to have a relapse. Omri pinched a nose dropper full of the whiskey from his parents' drinking cupboard and squeezed a little tiny bit into Boone's throat before the Indian girl, whose name was Bright Stars, as a reference to her shining eyes, Omri supposed, had succeeded in conveying the fact that Boone was perfectly all right, and he fainted, and he was faking it. Still, after he had his drink, Boone seemed to be much better. Omri and Patrick decided it wouldn't do him any harm, as he's used to it after all. And thereafter, Boone got a liquor ration 3 times a day, and did very well on it. He'll be ready to go back tomorrow, said Omri, the 4th day, and Boone, having a leg up on Little Bear, managed to ride the horse around the seed box in a steady walk. They'll probably look after him better than we can in his own time. The thought stuck him, and he fished out his pocket the drawing that Boone had done. Boone, is this your hometown? Sure is. Omri studied it closely underneath the magnifying glass. Away up the street, he saw a little sign saying doctor. Is he a good doctor? But about as good as anybody out of the West, I reckon. Fishing bullets out of man's arms or cut off foot for snake bite it. Neat as it can be. I seen him bring a pal of mine back from dead near enough by putting a hot coal on his belly button. He never operates till a man's dead drunk, and he don't charge extra for the liquor either. Omri and Patrick looked at each other. You'd feel that you'd be in good hands with this doctor looking after you, Patrick said worriedly. Sure would. Anyhow, don't you know Sawbones now? My wound's healed up fine. As long as I got my whiskey, I'll be fine and good as new. Boone bore not the slightest ill will towards Little Bear for having shot him. There was an Injun's natural nature, pure and simple. I'd more help myself if I can keep away from my horse and my bottle. That night before Omri had decided to send them back, they held the brotherhood ceremony. I wish we could ask our brothers, said Patrick to Omri at the school that day. Suppose we tell them one day about this. They'll never believe us. Sending them back, said Omri slowly, doesn't mean the magic won't work anymore. I'm going to put the key away somewhere so I won't be tempted, but it will always be there. So Patrick looked at him wonderingly. I never thought about that, he said slowly. So there's nothing to stop us for months or even years from now from bringing Boone and Little Bear back for a visit. I don't know, said Omri. Maybe their time is different from ours. It would be awful if they were old, or... He couldn't say dead. Both Boone and Little Bear came from such dangerous times. Omri shivered and changed the subject. As for our own brothers coming, he said, all I want my brothers is to keep that rat in its stupid cage. That rat had been caught by Omri after a long, patient wait with cheese and a fish net, and Omri had threatened Gillian with the worst fate imaginable if he gets away again. The two boys went to Yap's after school and bought a feast for food for the ceremony. Salted nuts, chips, chocolate. Omri bought a square pound of the best meat in the butcher's for the tiny hamburgers. A teaspoonful would have been enough, but the butcher wasn't interested in that. They got bread, biscuits, cake, soda from Omri's mother. Omri sneaked another dropful of the hard stuff, without much, which Boone would certainly not consider a festive occasion. Omri rather surprised Boone when he agreed to be a brother of a stinking redskin at all, but Boone actually seemed rather to like the idea. "'Tain't just anyone gets to be a brother with an Indian chief, you know," he said proudly. As he rolled up his sleeve, Bright Stars carefully swabbed his arm with soap and water. Then she saw Little Bear sharpening his knife on a pebble, and he turned pale. "Heck, it'll hurt," he muttered, but Patrick told him not to be a coward. "It's only a little nick, nothing at all." "Easy for you," retorted Boone. "I ain't sure this is such a nice idea after all." But he cheered up when he saw the campfire being kindled and the smell of meat and Bright Stars was cooking, and he pointed a stick at Omri and gave him a good swig of the dropper, and he swaggered up to Little Bear and offered his arm with a drunken flourish. "Chop away, brother," he said loudly. Little Bear went through the routine first, cleaning himself, offered a loud chanting prayers to the spirits, and performing marvelous stomping dance around the fire, and then he nicked his own wrist with the point of the knife, and the blood swelled up, and Boone took one look and burst into tears. "Oh, I don't wanna, I changed my mind," he bawled. But it was too late for that. Little Bear seized his arm before Boone knew what was happening, and the deed was done. Bright Stars found the wrists together in a strip tied torn from her own red dress. Boone looked to bemused away, and said, "Gee whiz, we done it! I'm part Indian. Well, I guess I can't say nothing against him now or in the future." The two brothers sat on the ground. Bright Stars served them their cooked meat and all the rest of the feast. Patrick and Omri offered congratulations and stared down at their own food. They kept the campfire going, and tiny bits of broken matchsticks and bits of coal dust that Omri collected from outside the bunker, which, when sprinkled with the flame, made it spit in minute sparks. Looking at it, the three figures around it, the boys gradually lost their sense of size altogether. "I feel as if we're just the same size as them," murmured Patrick. "Yeah, me too," Omri said. "I wish we were all the same size. Then there'd be no problems." "Don't be funny. No problems with those two full-grown Indians and a 6-foot crying cowboy?" "I meant if we were small, we could enter their world, sleep in the longhouse, ride their horses." "I wouldn't mind eating one of those hamburgers," said Omri. Bright Stars was now crouched by the fire, tending to it and singing softly. One of the horses whinnied. Boone seemed to have dropped off to sleep, leaning against Little Bear's shoulder. Little Bear alone was aware of the boys watching them, and he beckoned to Omri with his free hand. When Omri bent over, he said, "Now?" "Now? You mean go back now?" "Good time. We're all happy. Not wait till morning." Omri looked at Patrick. He nodded slowly. "When you do go into the cupboard," Omri said, "you must hold Bright Stars, or she may not go back with you." "Women go back with Little Bear. Little Bear hold on tight, won't let go. And horse. Little Bear only Iroquois with horse." "But Boone must go separately. Don't drag him back to your time. People would kill him, even if you are a new brother." Little Bear looked at Boone asleep at his side, and their joined wrists. Then he looked back at the knife and cut the thing that bound them off. Patrick gently lifted Boone up. "Don't forget his hat. He'd never forgive us if we left that behind." To be safe, he sat Boone on his horse. Cowboys often ride in their sleep. He didn't stir Little Bear, led him down the camp, across the table, and up the other ramp. Then Omri stood against the rim of the cupboard. Then Little Bear went back to the seed box. Carefully, he and Bright Stars put out the fire with the earth. Little Bear took one last look at his longhouse. Then he put up Bright Stars onto his horse and back of him and led him after Boone. They stood there together at the bottom of the cupboard. Nobody spoke. Omri, his hand on the door, which Patrick suddenly said, "I'm going to wake Boone up. I don't care. I've got to say goodbye to him." Hearing his name, Boone woke up so suddenly they nearly fell off his horse. He had to clutch the high pommel of the saddle. "What you want, kid?" asked Patrick, whose face was close to him. "You're going home now, Boone. I just wanted to say goodbye." Boone stared at him, then face slowly crumpled. "I can't say goodbye," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. He pulled a huge, grubby red handkerchief out of his pocket. "I just refuse to say it, that's all. I'll go burst out crying if I do." And he blew his nose with a trumpet blast. Omri and Little Bear staring at each other. Something else was needed to say. Some farewell. It was Little Bear who thought of it. "Omri, give hand." Omri put his hand forward. The horse braced the legs, but Little Bear held him steady. Little Bear took hold of Omri's little finger, drew his knife, pricked it in the soft part, and a drop of blood appeared. Then Little Bear solemnly pressed his own wrist against the place and held it together. "Brother," he said, looking at Omri with his fierce black eyes for the last time. Omri withdrew his hand. Little Bear jumped onto the back of the horse behind Bright Stars, holding around her waist so that he and she and the horse were made one unit and could not be separated during whatever kind of unearthly journey they were about to make through the unknown regions of time, space, and proportion. Little Bear raised his arm in the Indian salute. Omri put the hand on the door. He nearly couldn't do it. He had to set his teeth. Boone and his horse stood patiently, but the Indian horse started to prance and sidle. It put up its head and gave a long, challenging neigh. "Now!" cried Little Bear. Omri drew his breath, closed the door, and turned the key. He and Patrick stood frozen with sadness and the strangeness of it all. Both of them silently counted to 10. Then very slowly Omri opened it. His hand could not lift the key. He turned it back and swung the door open. There they were, two plastic groups, formed out of shells, the real creatures that had been. Each boy lifted out their own, helplessly examined it. The living details were blurred. Plastic can't show the fine beaded work and the perfection of the hair and the muscles and the folds of the hide of the horse's coat and the beautiful girl's skin. But the figures were there, but the people and the personalities were gone. Patrick's eyes met Omri's and both were wet. "We could bring them back just real quick," Patrick said. No, they know. They're home now. Omri put his group, the Indian girl and the horse, on the shelf nearest his bed where he could see them easily. He laid down the beaded belt, still real, beside Patrick, slipped the mounted cowboy in his pocket, keeping his hand around it as almost as if to keep it warm. Then Omri took the key and left the room. His mother was in the kitchen, getting everyone a hot drink before bed. She took one look at Omri's face, and her hands became still. "What's happened? What's wrong?" "Nothing, Mum. I want you to keep this key. I lost it. Luckily, I found it again, and you told me it was important. Better you keep it, please." She nearly refused, but then looking at him, she changed her mind, and they took the key from him. "I'll get a chain, and I'll wear it," she said. "Like I always meant to." "You won't lose it, will you?" She shook her head and suddenly reached for him and hugged his face against hers. He was shaking. He broke away and then ran up to the room where Patrick was all standing there with his hands in his pocket gazing at the cupboard. "Come on, I'm going to put all sorts of medicines in it," Omri said loudly. "Bottles of pills, stuff Mom's finished with. And we'll pretend it's a doctor's drug cupboard, and we can make lots of them together." His voice peered out, which was silly games, such as they played before. He didn't feel like the slightest interest in them now. "I think I want to go for a walk," said Patrick. "But what should I do with the cupboard?" asked Omri desperately. "Leave it empty," said Patrick, "just in case." He didn't say in case of what, but he didn't have to. You just know that you could, and that was enough. The end.